The Pacific Ocean, 1942. The air crackles with tension and the static of radio waves. Aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer, a young communications officer stares in horror at a decoded Japanese message. His face is pale in the dim red light of the radio room. The message details an American troop movement, a movement that was supposed to be a secret, encrypted with the latest American cipher machine. The Japanese knew. They had known for hours. This scene repeats itself across the vast Pacific theater. American plans relayed by radio are intercepted, deciphered, and turned against them. The result is catastrophe. Ambushed patrols. Ships sunk before they reached their destination. Entire companies of Marines wiped out in jungles they thought were secure. In a makeshift command center on a captured island, Major James Owens slams his fist on a map-covered table. The frustration in the room is a physical presence, thick and suffocating. "They're reading our mail, gentlemen," he barks at his exhausted staff. "Every code we throw at them, the M209, the Sagaba, they break it. It's like we're sending them our battle plans on a postcard." A young, bright-eyed lieutenant speaks up. "Sir, our machines are the most advanced in the world. The mathematical combinations are useless if the enemy has the key." Owens interrupts, his voice tired. "And they keep finding the key. We need something new. Something they can't possibly predict. Something that isn't a machine. I don't know what, but we are losing this war one broken code at a time. The problem is monumental. The Americans are fighting blind and deaf in their own communications. Every order, every request for support, every casualty report is a potential death sentence, broadcasted to a ruthless and clever enemy. The very technology that should give them an advantage has become their greatest vulnerability. The Japanese signal intelligence is too good, too fast. Desperation begins to set in. They need a miracle, an impossible solution to an unbreakable problem. And in a small, unremarkable office in California, that impossible solution is about to walk through the door, not in the form of a new machine, but with the memory of a childhood spent in the high desert of Arizona. The impossible idea began not on a battlefield, but decades earlier in the vast, sun-baked silence of the Arizona desert. A young boy named Philip Johnston played with Navajo children, his missionary father's work forging a unique bond. He learned their language not as a scholar, but as a friend. He swam in the same rivers, heard the same stories, and became one of the few outsiders ever to truly speak and think in the complex melodic tongue of the Diné, the Navajo people. Decades later, that boy was now a middle-aged civilian engineer, too old to fight but burning with a desire to serve. Reading a newspaper article about the military's communication crisis, a dormant memory sparked to life. He remembered not the Navajo, but a different tribe. During World War I, a group of Choctaw men had transmitted messages in their native language, confusing German interceptors. The idea hit him with the force of a physical blow. What if? He immediately drove to Camp Elliott in San Diego, requesting an audience with the Marine Corps signal officers. He was met with polite skepticism, a civilian with a wild story about using Indian languages. Undeterred, Johnston was granted a meeting with a weary Major Owens and his staff. He stood before them, not in a uniform, but in a simple suit, his passion his only weapon. "Gentlemen," he began, "the Japanese are brilliant cryptographers. They can break any code built on Western logic, any mathematical pattern. So we must give them something that has no pattern they can recognize. We must give them a language." A skeptical colonel leaned back in his chair. "A language, Mr. Johnston? You mean like Choctaw in the last war? The Japanese are not the Germans. They will simply record it, study it, and break it." "Not this language," Johnston insisted, his voice firm. "The Navajo language. It is unwritten. Its syntax, its grammar, its very sounds are utterly alien to anyone who hasn't grown up with it. It has no analogs in Japanese, German, or any European language. It is, for all intents and purposes, an unbreakable code, spoken from the mouth of one man directly into the ear of another, thousands of miles away." The room was silent. The officers exchanged dubious glances. It sounded like a fantasy. But Major Owens, remembering the bodies piling up in the Pacific, saw a glimmer of something in Johnston's determined eyes. It was a desperate, ridiculous, and utterly brilliant gamble. Prove it, Owen said finally. Give me a demonstration. Show me that this unbreakable language can work under combat conditions. Johnston had his chance. The fate of a revolutionary program now rested on the shoulders of a few dozen men he had yet to find. Men from the desert he called home. The high desert of the Navajo Nation, 1942. A dust-covered government car bounced along a dirt road, kicking up a plume of red dust. Inside, Philip Johnston carried the weight of the Marine Corps' hopes. His mission was as simple as it was monumental. Find the first recruits. He needed men who were fluent in both Navajo and English, with sharp minds and unwavering nerves. He wasn't just looking for soldiers. He was looking for living, breathing cryptographic machines. He found them at boarding schools and trading posts and tending sheep on the vast, windswept mesas. He approached young men like Carl Gorman, Chester Nez, and Johnny Manuelito. Their initial reaction was a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Why did the White Eyes want them? The United States government, an entity that had often sought to suppress their culture and language, was now asking to use its greatest secret as a weapon. Johnston explained the concept. They would become code talkers. They would use their language to send messages for the Marines. They would create a code within a code, developing words for military terms that didn't exist in Navajo. A tank would become a turtle. A bomber plane would be a pregnant bird. A battleship would be an ironfish. The idea was met with profound thought. For these men, their language was sacred, a gift from the holy people, the very thread that connected them to their history and identity. Using it for war was a serious, solemn responsibility. But the cause was just. The world was threatened by a darkness that respected no borders, no cultures, no sacred things. One by one, they agreed. They left the canyons and sagebrush of their homeland, trading moccasins for combat boots. 29 young Navajo men arrived at Camp Pendleton in California, forming the first all-Navajo platoon 382. They stood out immediately, their quiet demeanor and unfamiliar faces setting them apart from the other boisterous recruits. The training was intense and grueling. They weren't just learning to be Marines. They were inventing a new form of warfare on the fly. They huddled over notepads, creating and memorizing the code. They spent endless hours in radio shacks, practicing under simulated combat noise, their voices calm and steady as chaos erupted around them. They faced skepticism, not from the Japanese but from their own fellow Marines. Some officers saw them as a bizarre experiment, a sideshow. But as the Navajo perfected their craft, transmitting complex messages in under 20 seconds that would have taken a machine cipher 30 minutes, the skepticism began to turn into wary respect. The ridiculous idea was taking shape, transforming from a theoretical concept into a razor-sharp weapon, soon to be tested in the fiery crucible of the Pacific. The landing craft ramp dropped with a violent crash, unleashing hell onto the black sand beach of Guadalcanal. It was August 1942. Among the first Marines to charge into the maelstrom of Japanese machine gun fire were the men of the Navajo Code Talker platoon. This was no training exercise. The air sizzled with bullets, and the ground trembled from mortar explosions. This was the brutal test Philip Johnston and the Marine Corps had gambled on. In the midst of the chaos, huddled in a shallow foxhole half filled with brackish water, Corporal Carl Gorman set up his radio. His hands were steady, a stark contrast to the fear tightening his chest. Next to him, a young Marine lieutenant, his face smeared with soot and blood, screamed coordinates into a field phone. Desperate for artillery support, the line went dead, severed by shrapnel. "The line's cut! We're sitting ducks!" the lieutenant yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. Gorman looked up, his eyes meeting the officer's. "I can send it," he said, his voice calm. The lieutenant stared at him, disbelief warring with hope. There was no time for debate. He shoved the scrap of paper with the coordinates at Gorman. "Do it, now!" Gorman keyed his handset. The familiar guttural sounds of Navajo spilled from his lips, a stark, ancient contrast to the modern symphony of destruction around him. "Dibewichi naki, sena na hai, twudi," he spoke, relaying the enemy position. 1,000 miles away, in a quiet radio room on a command ship, another Navajo operator, Private Joe Hosteen, scribbled down the message. He translated the code almost instantly. Grid 238, enemy machine gun nest, ridge west of the river. The coordinates were immediately relayed to the artillery batteries. Back in the foxhole, the lieutenant stared at Gorman, then at the sky. The wait felt like an eternity, each second stretching out under the relentless enemy fire. Then a new sound joined the cacophony, the distant, welcome thunder of American shells. They screamed overhead and landed with devastating accuracy on the Japanese ridge, silencing the machine gun nest. The lieutenant looked back at Gorman, his expression one of stunned awe. The ridiculous idea had just saved their lives. Word began to spread through the ranks. These quiet, mysterious men with the strange, melodic language on the radios weren't a curiosity anymore. They were a lifeline. They were the only voices on the airwaves the Japanese couldn't understand, the only signal that couldn't be turned into a death warrant. The code had passed its first bloody test. The gamble was paying off. The success on Guadalcanal was not a fluke. It was the beginning of a revolution in military communications. As the island-hopping campaign intensified, the Navajo code talkers became the nervous system of the entire Marine Corps in the Pacific. From the fetid jungles of Bougainville to the bloody shores of Tarawa, their unique voices crackled through the static, directing everything from troop movements to massive naval bombardments. The true genius of the code was its elegant complexity, a fortress built on 3 layers of defense. The first layer was the Navajo language itself, an unwritten, tonally complex tongue with no relation to any Asian or European language, making it phonetically incomprehensible to Japanese listeners. The second layer was the code dictionary the men had created. They had built a lexicon where fighter plane became hummingbird, dahiti, submarine became ironfish, bishlo, and a battalion was a red soil, dibe wichii. For letters, they used a phonetic alphabet. For example, A was wulachi, ant, B was shush, bear, and C was mawasi, cat. But the third most brilliant layer was improvisation. If a word didn't exist in their dictionary, they could simply describe it in Navajo. A location without a code name could become the place where the tall rock leans toward the rising sun. This fluid, living quality of the code made it truly unbreakable. It was not a static cipher to be cracked, but a flowing conversation, a story told in a language only 2 people in the world could understand at that moment. Japanese intelligence units, renowned for their cryptanalytic skills, were baffled. They recorded thousands of hours of these strange transmissions. They assigned their best linguists and codebreakers to the task. They tried everything: frequency analysis, pattern recognition, comparing it to known Native American languages. But it was all futile. The sounds were too foreign, the structure too alien, the code too adaptive. To the frustrated Japanese, it was nothing but meaningless, impenetrable noise. They officially classified it as an unbreakable cipher, a complete and utter mystery. The code talkers themselves operated under immense pressure. They knew the entire battle could hinge on the accuracy and speed of their transmission. A single mispronounced word, a single moment of hesitation, could send men to the wrong location or bring friendly fire down on their own positions. They carried this burden with quiet dignity, their voices remaining a steady, calm anchor in the storm of war. The ridiculous idea had become the most secure communication system in the entire war, a silent weapon that was changing the course of history. As the war raged on, the Navajo code talkers were everywhere, their unique skills becoming indispensable. But their heroism came at a profound personal cost, hidden from the world and even from their own families. On the island of Iwo Jima, the fighting reached a nightmarish intensity. For the first 48 hours of the battle, the code talkers worked without rest. 6 of them operated around the clock in the most exposed forward positions, relaying over 800 critical messages without a single error. Every coordinate for naval gunfire, every report of enemy movement, every call for medical evacuation passed through their lips in the sacred language of their ancestors. Major Howard Connor, the signal officer of the 5th Marine Division, would later state, "Without the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. Their work saved countless lives and was pivotal in securing one of the war's most hard-fought victories. Yet within this triumph lay a deep personal sacrifice. Many of the code talkers saw their close friends and fellow Marines die beside them. They transmitted casualty reports, sometimes containing the names of their own relatives or men from their own communities. They had to maintain their professional composure, their voices steady on the radio, while their hearts were breaking. When the war finally ended in 1945, the code talkers returned home as Marines, but not as public heroes. The very weapon they had wielded with such effect, their language, was now a state secret. The program was classified top secret by the U.S. government. They were ordered to never speak of their role, not to their families, not to their tribal leaders, not to anyone. They came back to a nation that still did not fully accept them, to a homeland where they often faced discrimination. They carried the invisible wounds of war, the memories of friends lost, the sounds of battle, the weight of their secret. They could not put their unique skills on a resume. They could not proudly tell their children how their father had helped win the war. They were heroes condemned to silence, their monumental contribution buried by the very government they had served so faithfully. The code that had been their strength in war became their burden in peace. For 23 years, the Navajo code talkers carried their secret. The war ended, the world moved on, but they remained silent, their story locked away in classified government vaults. It wasn't until 1968 that the U.S. government finally declassified the program, releasing the incredible story to the public. The news was met with astonishment. The American public, and indeed the world, learned of the unsung heroes who had used their ancient language as a weapon of modern warfare. For the code talkers and their families, it was a moment of profound validation. They could finally speak openly about their service. They could tell their grandchildren the true story of what they had done in the Pacific. But official recognition was still slow in coming. The code talkers themselves began to organize, advocating for their place in history. The public started to understand the immense debt owed to these men. Documentaries were made, articles were written, and the story of the Unbreakable Code entered the national consciousness. The pinnacle of this long-delayed acknowledgement came at the dawn of a new century. In the year 2000, the U.S. Congress convened a special ceremony. The few dozen surviving original code talkers, now elderly men with lined faces and slow gaits, traveled to Washington, D.C. There in the Capitol Rotunda, they were presented with the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian award. For those who had passed away, the medals were given to their families, a symbolic gesture honoring their sacrifice. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both pride and the sorrow that so many of their brothers had not lived to see this day. As they stood in their traditional dress, medals around their necks, they were no longer just Marines. They were living legends, the embodiment of a unique and powerful legacy. The story of the Navajo code talkers is more than a tale of military ingenuity. It is a story of how a culture, once suppressed, became a shield for the nation that had tried to erase it. Their unbreakable code was more than a collection of words. It was a testament to the enduring strength of their people. They had entered the war as men from the desert, and they had emerged as national treasures, their voices forever etched into the history they helped to shape. The long silence was finally broken, and their song of courage would now be remembered for generations.